thing
live.
they heard. That was nice.
Hey, are you going live? Yeah, we're going live.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay, now I see it. I don't know. The message was like delayed on my end.
That's all right. Well, we're live. Hey, welcome everybody. Is this our first one in August? It is, because August 1st was last Thursday. First session in August. I know there's lots of weather going on around the country in certain areas. Hope that everyone is safe. I know Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, especially. We have a bunch of customers in Florida, Georgia, and South Carolina, even maybe in the North Carolina.
You've
Um,
some family there too. So
yeah, and so I know there's been a lot of flooding and electricity issues. So hopefully everyone's able to watch today. And
yeah.
if
And
not,
so
you'll check the recording.
well, and turn your video off. Like, hey, we're doing a podcast here, so you can listen. It's just as good an experience as watching.
Absolutely.
I mean, you can not see Tom's funny expressions, but you know, hey.
Ouch. Little reality video there for you all.
Uh,
Uh,
okay,
so
so shall
all
we
right.
get started with the recording of our podcast for today? We're going to talk about loyal listeners today. That's really important. So I think it's a great topic.
Yeah, I agree. So let's do it. All right. We're already recording, right? Yeah, of course we are. So we're just good to go. All right. Welcome to Feed Your Brand. I'm Tom Hazard, along with my co-host Tracy Hazard. Today, we're going to talk about how to unlock the secret to podcast dominance, serving loyal, and emphasis on loyal podcast listeners. And there's a difference. There's casual listeners, occasional listeners, but loyal listeners are the ones that we all should want, right, Tracy?
Right. And loyal listeners are defined in a very specific way, meaning that they listen to every episode and they listen all the way through. That is a real key metric that we like to look at here, which is basically listen through, right? And it's the most important one and also the least the hardest one for you to get your stats on. Right. So, but the listen through matters. When you have listeners that listen all the way through, first off, they're getting something out of it or they wouldn't hang around. So there's alignment and a match between you and that listener. That's high. That's really important. Secondly, we always call it you're in my ear, right? Like you're in my ear. Like I hear your voice. One of my favorite movies is When Harry Met Sally.
I think I can join you in that. It's one of my
Yeah,
favorites
exactly.
as
One of my
well.
favorite movies. Absolutely love it. And I love this whole thing where the Sally the character Sally and Harry are sitting down with their two best friends having dinner together and they've set each other up on a double date. But the character played by Carrie Fisher actually falls in love with his best friend and not him. And so at the dinner, she says, she quotes someone's article, and he said, I never had somebody quote me back to me before. And that's how
Yeah,
they fell in love.
he says I wrote that. She discovers that,
Yeah.
she was quoting him and he's like, "What?" Yeah, yeah. That was an interesting experience. And those kind of things happen to
All,
us podcast hosts a lot,
a
actually.
lot, all the time. It's like, I think I heard this on your show. Like, did you say this? And I was like, yep, I absolutely said that. I say it all the time. Right. So it happens. And when that happens, you're in their ear, you're in their head. You have had an impact. And that means that they've recognized that. Now, whether they're conscious that they heard it from you or not, like doesn't really matter because that impact has this sense of next time they listen to your show that they need to listen up. And so they're getting something of value out of it. They're sharing it with others. There cannot be a better way to make sure that your show is growing than to tap into these loyal listeners more and more. So we want to understand them a little better. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about is the mentality of these listeners today so that we can start to maybe craft some of the things that we do or be conscious even by us just bringing you awareness of these kind of listeners and the value of them. It makes it so that as you're thinking about your content, as you're thinking about your topics, as you're thinking about what you're doing, you're adding in things that are attuned and straight tuned to these listeners, right? And that's where we're going to create more value, create more sharing, create more loyal listeners, and grow our audience in general.
Now, Tracy, I know you have some specific points you want to cover today, but is there a fundamental foundational level that we should be talking about, just about podcasting in general and how real you are and talking to your audience and making them feel like you're speaking to them? Because I've, experienced a couple of podcasts recently that are more reading from a script, and even though it's not a drama podcast, and that is less personal, and I don't think breeds as loyal of a listenership. Do you agree?
So I'm going to say, if you don't do your job well, if you are not a great writer, if you are then not a great dramatist on the other side of it, meaning that I see a lot of people who write really well, but when they read it, it's reading it and it doesn't have emotion and feeling, and it doesn't convey the same thing that an actor would convey. At that point, you should hand your script over to somebody else, right? And let
If you have a
them,
scripted show. Yeah,
yeah.
so the delivery, if you have a scripted show, is incredibly important. But I think most podcasters, especially most independent podcasters, don't script their content. They have maybe an outline, some bullet points, an intention, a plan, but they're speaking from the heart, right?
So I can tell the difference the moment I listen to a show, that it's scripted or not. Like within one or two sentences, I can tell the difference. And if you can tell, it feels like a lecture. It loses something in the intimacy of you talking to me. It makes me feel like I'm in a big lecture hall and you're telling everybody your speech, right? And so it loses that sense of that intimacy you're talking about. And so, yeah, you will not have the same effect. For the same reason, those that do zero commentary around their interviews tend to not have loyal listeners in the same way. They have listeners who like the topic of their show. They might listen to most episodes, but they will feel free to skip a guest they don't like, they don't understand, or feel like you wrote something well enough, like they don't know who they are, and whatever you wrote in the description doesn't entice them to want to check it out, right? They're going to feel free to skip it because they don't have an attachment to you as the host, because you're not providing anything but an access to a guest. And so if the guest's not appealing, it's not working for you. So that's where we see a lot of the guest shows, they drop when they don't have commentary before and after, or they're not carefully curating and crafting the conversation. So if it's just let's get to know you, or it's the same 7 questions every time,
Oh
those
no,
tend to
that's the
not have
worst.
listen through.
Formulaic, where it's the
Yeah.
same questions every single time. Yes, I agree. But and what you were saying there though in the beginning was, you know, I forget the word you used, but you were talking about sort of context commentary around, like, on the outside of, before and after the interview. You meaning if it's strictly all about the interview, you get on, you're with the guest, you interview them, you say goodbye, episode over. Listeners aren't getting as much of you and your mind share as the host. Is that what you're saying?
That's what I'm saying. And I'm saying, if I've already seen that guest on another show,
Oh,
why would I
especially if
listen?
they're promoting a book, because it's kind of like if you ever see somebody promoting a movie on late night TV and they do the circuit, they go on every late night TV show over the course of a week or two. And if you watch more than one and you see them, it's like, well, they said the same thing on this show as they did on that show. It
So
is
I think the
less
shows have
interesting.
gotten better. The late night shows have gotten better at that. And that comes from really understanding that you have to have differentiated content, right? And
Right.
so I think media trainers are getting better at training those sound bites. So you're going to tell this story on this show, you're going to tell that story on this show, but if you're not prepping with your guest, and you're not doing those kind of media um, prep up things, you're not likely to get something different, because they're not probably experienced in that and understanding what it is. They don't care. They just want your audience to hear their pitch so they'll buy their book, right? Like, that's it. They don't care
Right.
about the other part. They don't care about that experience to your audience, and they don't care about the audience coming back for the next episode. They do not, your guest does not care about that. You do.
Right. And
So you have to treat it.
I'm often advising new podcasters who are not experienced that they really do need to be relatable, be real, let their personality come through. And, there are some choices to be made as you're recording an episode of, something that might have been unintentional, but has an element of authenticity in it where maybe didn't plan it. You're like, oh, should I edit that out of my episode? But not always. I mean, we do these sessions live, and even sometimes when I start my lead into the, welcome to Feed Your Brand, and I totally mess up, I'm like, all right, forget it. Scrub it. Let's start that again, Tracy. Even though we're live with, on social media here, but what we're going to put out as the podcast, I wanted it to be right, and it was right at the beginning, so I'll start over. But in general, we don't really stop or cut much out from the middle of this live broadcast because I think people like, all of it in terms of the details of what you and I talk about, and maybe even if you and I disagree on something or
But
whatever it
that's
might be.
because but that's because we're both here, and we take this kind of job of crafting the conversation seriously, right? So you just kind of went on for a little bit that maybe would, like, I if you were my guest, I'd have cut you off by now. Like, because it's just like you got to make sure you move on and stay on task, stay on topic, because that's what they're here for, to get the payout on whatever it is you promised based on that title of that episode or that topic that you're talking about, or the thing that this guest can share that's only unique to them and valuable to your audience, right? We're making that connection point. So creating that and making sure that we're curating that every which way we go and stay on that doesn't mean we don't find something really curious and interesting and we don't follow that, but we do have to come back, right?
Which you've just done right now.
Which I just did, right? So, like, this is how we are always demonstrating how we do this, right? But I've also conducted over 3,500 interviews. So conducting interviews and being able to craft that, and we've done thousands of episodes together. So we have experienced off of each other as well. And one of the things that we do is carefully think about the audience at multi levels. And I think this is a key to not talking down to your audience is really important. So you may not be at this stage of podcasting yet. You may still be struggling with getting your mic plugged in. Like, and I totally relate to that. Like, I hear you. I get it. And this topic may not be where you're ready, but you're going to remember this topic. And you're going to come back to it when you say, you know what, I'm having trouble with loyal listeners. What did Tom and Tracy say? I know they did an episode about this. And you're going to come back and you're going to listen to it again, or you're going to, search through our blog and find something and find where we said something about it, right? It's going to leave an impression on you because we didn't talk down. We didn't keep it simple. We didn't just do a 101 show. And that makes a difference because every one of our listeners is at a different stage of their business, of their podcast. And our job is to be just ahead of you enough that we still know what it feels like to experience it, or be still in it enough to know what it feels like. Because if we are so far removed, and this is the thing that I just was talking to somebody about, why I don't like the podcast events that are out there right now. Like, I don't like the big event companies, that any of the events that are going on. I don't like them because I think too many of their speakers are disenfranchised with the podcast world because they're not podcasting. If they truly loved it, if it was truly adding value in it, then they would still be podcasting consistently and constantly. By the mere fact that they're not, and yet they're speaking on a stage selling something, says to me that there's a disconnect in what they're selling you and its value to you. That's huge. I mean, the last time we went to one of those podcast trade shows, there were a dozen of the 20 speakers that had pod faded. A dozen.
Yep.
That says I'm not in it with you, right? That says I'm not there. I don't have boots on the ground. I'm not working through the problems of this industry. I'm not committed to it. And that's what happens a lot when we separate ourselves from this and said, okay, we did it. Now we're going to teach about it. Don't you think your
Right.
listeners hear that?
It's resonating so much with me, Tracy, and it's one of the reasons why not only do we continue to podcast so that we're experiencing things that other podcasters are experiencing today, because it is different today than it was 3 years ago and 5 years ago and 10 years ago. It really is. But also to launch a podcast today, that's very different than how things were when we launched our first one. And so we do start multiple podcasts. You and I each try to start a new one every year. So we're experiencing that. And, I think that's important, you know,
Yeah,
it's
it
very
really
important.
is. And so this is where you put you into the show, right? If you're
Hmm.
putting you in the show, if you're bringing on guests you know you can learn from and you need to learn from so your business grows, then you know it's valuable to your audience and they're going to listen through. There's no way they're going to skip it because if they know you're getting value from it, they want to get value from it too. Right. So that's really important to be thinking through. It's like, if I'm not carefully crafting the questions that I'm asking, I'm not using my own curiosity. If I'm not going to apply what I learn, it's going to come across to my audience that I'm not doing that. And then it's again at this point where it feels like a lecture. That's not a podcast, that's a course. Right? That's what classes are for. But here's the other thing. I mentioned this, I think last week, and I think there were a couple weeks ago. I mentioned this. I dropped this name. I think in our at the end when we answer questions from our community. So I don't think I actually said it on the podcast live, but I said that there's a type of loyal listener that I'm always looking for, and they're called completionists. And I'm a completionist, so I get it. Okay, I get them. So I'm a reader though, and I'm not always a podcast listener. I am a podcast listener too, but I am a reader first and foremost. And so if you ever looked at my Kindle, there's never a book that is 95% done. It's actually read. So sometimes you get to the end of the book and then they have a lot of sales and like preview chapters of like junk. And so there's still like another 5% of the book to go, but it's all sales. And so if I stopped reading the book at that point and like it's in my library, it would say 95% read. I can't stand that.
You
Like that's a
don't,
completionist
you're
attitude.
saying that just for you, the fact that it's saying, hey, Tracy, you almost finished this book, but you didn't. Therefore, something must be wrong with you. I mean, you must be thinking this in your head. It's like, all right, I have to complete it. I need to cross it off my list. I need it to be 100% done.
Yes,
That's
it
you,
is.
right? Yeah.
Exactly,
Okay. That
right?
sounds
I
very
want
much
to
like
cross
you.
it off my to-do list, right? This is a personality trait. This is why I'm sharing this with you. I am this person, so I can share this person with you. But think about this. How many of you get people to come into your company, buy your programs, and then do nothing,
Oh my gosh.
right?
Yeah.
We have
Well,
names
do
for them. We
nothing
call
or
them,
certainly. In fact, what would just happen? I mean, literally half an hour before we're recording this, before we're going live now, but we are recording this. We got an email from a customer that was in the process of launching a podcast literally 2 years ago and has come back and said, oh, I had this and that happen in my life. I'm back. I'm ready to go. Right. And
right.
it
But
happens a lot.
we didn't give up on her.
No.
We didn't give up on her at all. We still send her an email now and again. We remind her that we're here. We still put out all this content that she's kind of been following, even though different things are going right. So we continue to serve, even though they stopped consuming, right? Or they stopped participating in the process. And sometimes people get angry. I'm just going to be clear about it. They get angry at you because you're reminding them that they're failing or that they haven't done it or whatever that might be, right? It's a reminder that you're nagging them, right? And so they
Well, our
don't like it.
intention is to make sure they know we're here to support them and trying to encourage
Yeah.
them to get value from podcasting, which is why we're here, right?
Right. So you have to find a gentle way to do it. We have a gentle way to do it. We have a
Yeah.
touch point once a week. We have a touch point
Well,
every
no, somebody
30
who's checked
days.
out, it isn't once a week. It's
Yeah,
somebody
it's
who
every
really
30 to
stopped.
90 days,
Yeah,
depending on
yeah.
how long you go, right? So it's really not, it's not intense, right? That's something that we've discovered is that when we push it, it hurts them, right? So we want but the flip side of that is there's these people who will come in and not miss a single word you say. They will do every exercise that you put in your course. They will read every chapter of your book. Like they will do all of those things. Those people make the best students. They make the best clients. They push you, they push me, and I love it to be a better coach, to be a better business, because they're ready for the next thing. And so we don't want to skip serving those people and rewarding them with really great topics and content just because it's not like meeting up with the SEO game and like, Libsyn covered this and SoundCloud covered that and Anchor covered this. So we should too. Like, that's boring. That's me too. That doesn't serve our audience that's different, that already chose to listen to us, chose to work with us, right? We have to think about them carefully and what makes them unique, what we could deliver that's better than that Me Too stuff that everybody's doing because it goes viral on YouTube, right? It hits a hashtag that's popular. We have to go beyond that. Now, it doesn't mean we don't tap into that. Like, look, we just updated right before we started this recording. We just updated the SEO of the title for this episode. And I decided that we wanted to call it Loyal Podcast Listeners. I wanted that to be the keyword that was in here instead of the one that was planned. And so, because that's a better trending topic, it also resonates better. Who doesn't want loyal podcast listeners, right? So all of those things fit it because people have never heard the word completionist before, right? So
Right.
they
And that there's not going to be a lot of people searching on that term for sure, even though it may be a good term to talk about. I mean, when you explained what that means, how you are a completionist, that makes perfect sense. But are people going to search on that? Not so much. They might search
right.
on loyal listeners, loyalty, loyal customer, all sorts of different things in a more, I guess, common language, right? But now we're going to associate that in this episode, in this blog with completionist.
Right. And I'm giving you a picture of something you probably never heard of. So now you have this idea in your mind and you're sitting there thinking, who in my listener is a completionist? Well, you know who they are because they're the ones who message you back and ask a question. They're the ones who will reach out to you and tell you when there's a mistake, right? We had one of those. We had one of those who said, "Hey, Tom, hey, on Apple, you can do this now." And he was right. It
Right.
had
And I
changed
was
in
not
like the
aware it
last
had
week.
changed. Right, right,
Yeah.
right. And you know what? I'm perfectly
Yeah.
how do I say willing to be wrong about something. That's okay. That's I don't know how
But
you
I
describe
love that he
that, but
reached out,
yeah,
right?
I do
That
too.
shows loyalty and that shows that he got something from it and he was
Well,
like wanting to inform you and share with you as much as you were sharing with him.
yep.
That's valuable, right? So we want to keep that model going, but the other thing is that keep in mind that the person that completes stuff, that does it, are going to really be your best referrers. So if you want people to buy your stuff, come into your programs, be a part of your community, participate in that community, then we need to think about serving them on our podcast. We need to make sure we have a payout, a reward for them. And that means that we understand where they're at, we understand what they need, and we give it to them so that they can feel that they got a complete topic. One of the things us completionists hate is when somebody says at the show, they're like, "Oh yeah, let me share you a couple tips. Oh, and then you'll have to buy my book." I would have bought your book as a reward, but now I'm pissed and I won't buy it. It feels like a bait, and they will not like that. Give them a complete tip.
You
Even
need
if you
to
don't give them
serve
all the
first.
tips,
Yeah,
give them a complete tip,
I
right?
agree. We say this a lot. You need to serve the audience first and sort of earn the right to then make them other offers and things that they will end up paying for, but you've got to earn it first, and you do have to continually serve to a level free. I mean, that's like what we're doing with this podcast, and there's a lot of people that are getting value out of this show and are not Podtize customers, and that's okay, right?
Yeah, I think when we sit down and we approach our podcast from this perspective that our only goal is to sell you something, then you're already going to set yourself up for failure to those, and especially to those loyal listeners, because they could get stuff from other people who don't have that attitude. But if we sit in the confidence of, I'm going to serve you and you're going to join me anyway because I served. and I gave you something so valuable, and my perspective is useful, and my community has engagement and energy, and I live in this place. If I come from that confident place, that it doesn't matter if I give it away, because remember that most of your audience, right? Like, think about it. It's about, I'm going to say about 85% will never take action. And if they're never going to take action from what you say, then they didn't take anything from you. They did hear it and you gave it to them. They chose not to accept it and do something with it. But if someone, and this is what we found out really early, we did a free course. And we still have it. Like, it's a little outdated. We need to update it. But we have a free course on how to start a podcast our way. And we did a test run and we invited some people in to, we were deciding if we were going to charge for it.
Right.
And so
we did it live. These people, like, every weekday for a month,
yeah,
joined us live for the next step in the process, but they were doing it themselves. This wasn't done for you. This is
yeah. This was, it cost
the
them nothing, but a half hour every day for 30 days, basically, or for 20 days, because it was weekdays only. But anyway, and then over the weekend, they would catch up on some things because, you had to take all the steps. And we only had 2 people complete out of, I don't know, I think it's maybe 15
yeah,
who
we had
consistently showed
one of
up.
those people that did that is still a podcaster with us today and is now a done for you production customer too. She used to do everything all herself,
Yeah.
but not
Anyway, so
anymore.
it's just totally awesome. And so there's that. And then there is also, we had someone who set herself up, did everything, came over and hosted with us right away when we first offered hosting. And so, like, it was really early on. She was one of our first people in the program. And she just, I mean, I was so astounded by how wonderfully she followed what we told her to
Oh yeah.
do. But she referred so many people to us, and
Hmm.
that's made the huge difference. So she couldn't afford it, but she could afford to take the time to listen and then reward us back by sharing us with others. And that made a huge, huge difference. And she would credit the success of her show with with something she heard from us, or the way that we told her to do our cover art, or whatever it might have been. She credited us for those when people would comment on it, and then that's how we got shared. So these things do have residual value to you long term. You just have to remember that those loyal listeners are out there, and talk to them. It makes a huge difference when we talk to them, that we're also out there seeking the thing they need next, because they will reach out to us. And sometimes they will
Right.
give us this hint on something that's super valuable, a product we didn't know we needed to make, a feature we didn't know we should have. A lot of
So
times that comes to us that way.
And so, just to be clear, Tracy, I mean, you and I, this is a little easier because we're co-hosts when we're talking with each other and to each other, and not a lot of podcast. Well, I shouldn't say that. While there are lots of co-hosts out there, there's an awful lot more of you that are solo hosts, right? And if you're recording an episode that's just yourself, and I do it occasionally, Tracy does it occasionally, it's not like it never happens, but when we record solo episodes, it's a really different dynamic. And it can seem, especially if you're new at this, a little odd to be speaking to the listener, to be speak. It sounds rhetorical, but you're really not. You're speaking to someone else. It's just they're hearing you at a different time than you're speaking to them. And you have to get comfortable with speaking to the listeners and talking to them. And I'm pretty comfortable at this point with that. And, Tracy, I'm reminded of one of the most sort of fun and real moments that I know made a lot of our listeners in our very first podcast, WTFFF, really like us. It was very technical. It was a geeky topic, and you only the certain people were interested in it. But it ended up being a lot of people. We had over 100,000 listeners on that show. But there was a technical term that Tracy at one point used the wrong term, and I'm like, what are you talking about? What is that term? And it was wrong. And then I realized, oh, you meant this. And I sort of did a little bit of a face palm, if you saw the video, and said, I'm sorry, guys. Tracy was talking about, I'm sorry she got that. I mean, I was kind of embarrassed, but I also knew it was going to be kind of a fun and endearing moment of something real between us, because I was genuinely surprised. And we ended up getting a ton of people writing in and said, I loved that part of the episode where you had this little banter back and forth over that term that was wrong. It was,
I
it's
don't remember what the
only,
term was.
oh, I do. You
So
don't remember? It
I
was,
don't.
you called something a sled and it's actually a raft.
Oh,
I actually
okay.
remember it for 3D printing. You remember that? See, this is
Yeah,
where
it
it's just
seems like
totally technical. It's
I don't
not
even know.
important or relevant
It's a
here.
raft.
But
Okay,
anyway,
whatever.
you're right,
Yeah,
right, right. It's a technical term of something in
yeah,
computer 3D printing, and that doesn't really matter for this conversation. But the point was, it was sort of a moment of authenticity, not only in, communicating and speaking to the listener in that moment, but also between you and me, the hosts. And even though that won't happen if you're a solo host, there are moments of authenticity. I mean, if you have an epiphany in the middle of something you're saying and you're going to change what you say because what you now thought of as more valuable, by all means, you should go ahead and, go with it. Just because you had this plan and what ends up happening, whether it's with a guest or yourself, deviates from that plan, those are actually could be some of the golden moments in your
absolutely.
podcast.
Like, look, your audience knows the difference when you are talking to them. Like they know when
Yes.
they know when something doesn't land because you obviously you're talking about something that you really don't know about it, right? Like they know because they're like,
Oh
yeah, that's
yeah.
not true.
It's pretty hard
Yeah,
to fake it. No, I don't mind being wrong about something or somebody having a different opinion. That's
yeah.
all good
That's
too.
not the
That's
same thing as though
right.
you being like giving them advice from no experience. They can tell the difference, right? And so that's what we're really talking about here is that when you're always thinking about, and we used to do this, like, we used to cite some of our loyal listeners on air. We just like, so,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
so Jennifer from Chicago, this one's going to particularly resonate with you. Like we would talk to them. And because it was like, what is it? Isn't it David Letterman used to be like his like 7 listeners or whatever it was. He used to say that,
I don't
he
know. He
only
had
had
all sorts
7.
of great gags. Everything was from the home office in wherever, Nebraska or something like that. He would
Yeah.
make up a different home
Yeah, but
office
he only
almost
had like
every episode.
7 or 10 listeners or something like that. And so like
Right.
that's the kind of thing. It's like that's okay. Talk to those listeners because they're out there. You're rewarding them for reaching out to you. They'll reach out more because they feel identified. And it will encourage others to get themselves identified with you, right? They want your attention. They want to be seen by you. And so that is important to do. But remember, this is the thing about completionists and this loyal listener, the ones that are going to listen to your episode all the way through. That not only are they going to make the best clients, customers, whatever, readers,
Or
whatever you want
community.
from
It depends
community
on what
later,
your goal is. I mean, it's not always customers. Could just be growing your community or your listeners, whatever. But they'll be the
but
best ones. Yes.
it's not a heavy lift to ask them to do something.
Right.
They already want to reward you. They're receptive to your calls to action. They're receptive to responding to you. So they're the best opportunity you have for feedback. But if you're not talking to them, you're talking to those that are just new to you,
You're talking at them or over them or in any way, you
under
know,
them in a way. Cause like, yeah,
yeah.
it's more worrisome to be more basic, right? Cause then they think it's not worth their time. You're giving them something they've heard before, right? And so, but if you do that, if you talk with them, you have a better opportunity of reaching more audience in general because it feels very inclusive in energy. And that's
That,
what we get here all the time. This is
yeah.
like, some of these people who are coming back to us and podcasting with us again, it's like it felt vacant over where they were. They didn't get any sense that they were seen. They didn't get the sense that someone was working towards making their business and their podcast better. Because that's what we try to do here every single day. That's what we're working on. We're working on it for ourselves. We're working on it for our entire staff, and we're working on it for our entire client base and reaching out to a community who doesn't know us yet to share it with them too. That has an energy of it that deserves a reward. And that's when we really get what we want. Our podcast hits that dominance level where we're getting more and more listeners and more growth. So that's kind of all I want to leave with today on this topic. I don't know if you had anything else to add, Tom.
I just want to add one little thing. I'm not gonna, this is not gonna, this is a quick one, but I've also spoken with a few potential podcasters recently that have been creating YouTube videos for quite some time and have a back catalog of YouTube videos. And the question is, can I use those as podcasts now? Can I repurpose them? And there's never an absolute yes or no answer to that question, but there is one answer that's related to what we're saying today. And you want to breed loyal listeners, you can't just recycle old content by itself. Now, if that content is still relevant, here's how you can acknowledge the podcast listener. You become their hero, delivering them this great content. It could be a video you recorded 6 months ago, but if you want to publish as a podcast, you need to record a new little introduction to it now from you. And I'm not talking about your pre-recorded intro. I mean, you saying, hey, Feature Brand listeners, you know what? I wanted to share with you a conversation I had with Tracy 6 months ago about this. We were on location somewhere doing this, that, or the other. And what we talked about is really even more relevant today than it was then. So I wanted to share it with you. So here, listen to this video, and then we'll have a few thoughts after that. And then cut to that recording from that video, because when they listen to that video, they're going to know, like you said, Tracy, the energy is different, the intention was different. They're going to know it was not meant for you, the podcast listener. But if it's good, valuable content, by all means, let's use it. You just got to frame some proper context, acknowledge your podcast listener, acknowledge the elephant in the room that it wasn't recorded as a podcast first. They'll accept it and appreciate it at that point. So that's kind of related. So I thought I would share that, Tracy.
Yeah, there's no reason for you not to bring up older things. Like we refer to all different kinds of older episodes and other things like that, and bring them back in because they need them. And it's hard to navigate when you have lots and lots of episodes and you have lots and lots of videos, right? It's hard to navigate all of that. And especially if you're putting things in different areas, it is hard. If I'm not a YouTube viewer, and I'm a podcast listener, I want to be able to benefit from those same things if you're not going to use them in both places, right? So you need to reshare that. So that is a valuable resource that you're creating for your loyal listeners in that way. So anyway, great topic today, Tom. I think this is, really important for us to think about the energy of our show and like how we approach our show and the mindset that we have as we head into it. And really that at the end of the day is what grows our loyal listener base.
I agree. I hope you all enjoyed it. I certainly enjoyed recording this one more than some, because it's fun talking about some of those things from the past. And of course, we're recording this live with some of our existing clients on Zoom here with us, and we got a couple nice comments that kind of made me smile along the way. So that was very nice. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed it too. Hope you got some value out of it. And you know what? There are a couple other Feed Your Brand episodes and blog articles that exist that are related to some of the things we're talking about. And the links for those are going to be in the blog post for this episode when it publishes as a podcast on podcastersunited.org.
So thanks everyone for listening. This is Tracy and Tom on Feed Your Brand, and we'll be back next week with another topic and another episode just for you, loyal podcast listeners. All right, we'll stand there for the podcast.
Nice way to
Thank
end
you,
that.
live streamers, for being with us today. We appreciate you, and we're going to hop over to Zoom and